Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today is Tuesday, March 7th, 2023. The Agriculture and Natural Resources Subcommittee is now in session. Mr. Clerk, please take the roll.
Representative Fritz, Representative Halsey, Representative Jones, Representative Reedy, Representative Shaw, Representative Todd, Representative Travis, Vice Chairman Darby, Chairman Grills.
Here.
Chairman Grills, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Kyle, for taking the roll. Representative Shaw, if you would, lead us in prayer and the pledge to our flag.
Let us stand, please. Father, we thank you for the good graces of this day as we bow our heads, not only to thank you, but to acknowledge that we have sinned and come short of the glory that you provided for all of us. And we do ask your forgiveness. And then we ask for your guidance throughout this committee. We pray our blessings upon the chairman of this committee and all of its members. We ask these blessings in the name of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, we pray. Amen. Amen. May we pledge, pledge, I pledge an allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Committee, do we have any personal orders this morning? Chairman Reedy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And please help me make welcome the Stewart County High School seniors and their awesome advisors. If you'd please stand. They're here to talk to me and most of us about Rural Health Association District and Rural Health in Tennessee. Make them feel welcome.
Do we have any other personal orders? Well, I want to announce that we have a special guest with us this morning that are, I guess, an intern with Farm Bureau, Miss Gracie Plemons. Now, Gracie, won't you stand up and let everybody welcome her? I suggest you watch hanging out with those Farm Bureau folks. You may pick up some bad habits. But it is good to have you here. Anything else? With that, we'll go ahead and get into our calendar, in which we have a few things going on today. That brings us HB 980, the first thing on our calendar by Chairman Terry. We have a motion, a second. You are properly before the committee. You are recognized.
Thank you, Chairman and Committee, and I'm back with another solid waste bill in this committee. But this one is not actually dealing with the landfill. It's this bill is to allow a collective municipality to create a solid waste authority. As this committee may know, there is a landfill in my district, and the landfill is set to close in under 5 years, and this bill will simply help Murfreesboro facilitate an alternative for when the landfill closes. There is an amendment, if you guys would like to put that on there, that although it has statewide application, it narrows it essentially to Murfreesboro.
Okay.
That's up to you guys.
If it'd be okay with the committee, let's go ahead and put that amendment. If we have a motion, a second for them. We have a motion, a second for the amendment.
4733 is the drafting code.
That's what we have to. All those in favor of putting the amendment on the bill, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? On the bill. We are back on the bill. Chairman Terry, you're recognized.
Thank you. And so current law allows for counties to set up a solid waste authority, but Rutherford County, my county, does not have one, and they aren't planning on having one. And so what the intent of this is to do is my city has plans for when the landfill does close, and this would allow them to get into, to draw down some federal funds to help with facilitating the building of the facility. And I have some folks here, if you mind going out of session, that can describe all this, answer your questions, have the manager and assistant city manager.
Okay. Without objection, we'll go out of session and hear the folks from Murfreesboro out of session. If you would, we have this Darian Gore and Craig Tyndall. If you would, just please come up here, turn the mic on. You have about 3 minutes apiece to make your opening statements, and then the committee will ask questions of you. If you can answer those, that'd be awesome.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to speak about HB 980. The importance to the city is multiple, but the primary purposes are to allow the city to finance an alternative to landfilling municipal solid waste, MSW we'll call it. And we have a project that we're working on now, a biogas project, and it'd take a substantial amount of financing for that, and the authority would allow us to have that financing in what essentially is revenue bonds, so that it is dependent only upon the revenue of the facility itself, as opposed to the full faith and credit of the city. And that's important to the city as far as we go, and when we go forward to finance other projects that we need to do and do our regular municipal bonding, our general obligation bonds. So if we can separate that off, that's very important to us. The other important critical aspect of the bill, as far as in this session, is that there are federal subsidies that will substantially help this project. It's about a $60 million project. About 16 million of that could come from federal money.
Inflation Reduction Act.
The Inflation Reduction Act. But we have to be substantially under construction by the first of 2025. And so because of planning and construction, we're pressed. Middle Point will close in a very short period of time. It varies depending on the estimates, but it is in a short period of time. It aligns with us starting now on this project as opposed to going forward. But essentially what the bill did, as Representative Terry said, right now counties can do municipal authorities, or counties can do solid waste authorities. This allows only collecting municipalities, and it's been further limited through the amendment that went through today, to allow Murfreesboro to create a municipal authority. We're the only city in the county that collects municipal solid waste, and so we're the only one that really has a substantial interest to the magnitude that we would need to go out and get additional financing. So what we'd like to do is be able to create that authority, to create an independent entity that can finance this authority in a timely manner. So I'm happy to answer any questions that the committee may have. Mr. Gore, Assistant City Manager, has a lot more knowledge on how the facility works and a lot more details. He's an engineer, so careful what you ask him because you may get a lot more knowledge than you might want right off the bat.
Mr. Gore.
Thank you, Chairman. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all this morning. Real quick, kind of a high 30,000-foot overview of the alternative project that we're looking at to handle Murfreesboro's solid waste. It's Wasteway. It's a Warren County-based entity in Morrison, Tennessee. They started out as a Corps of Engineer project in the early 2000s. They went through substantial testing and using kind of the same type of equipment that you would see at a materials recovery facility that a waste management or a public would use. They have a proprietary way of putting this stuff together such that they can create 90% diversion of 90% diversion of solid waste, and they create a 70% biomass fuel. So this technology was recommended for deployment by the Corps in 2008. It was originally intended to compete with soil amendment and the nursery market down in Morrison and Warren County. It's more expensive to compete than most soil amendments, so it wasn't financially viable. Turn to 2019, the Environmental Protection Agency classified this material as a non-hazardous secondary material. What does that mean? They designate it as a coal or wood drop-in fuel substitute. So effectively, any boiler using coal or wood could use this material as a drop-in fuel. We hit COVID. I don't think they had time to necessarily get their legs under them before COVID hit. Once they got that 2019 designation, last summer, with some of the Inflation Reduction Acts and some of the federal subsidies for renewable natural gas, this particular feedstock, instead of being used as a solid fuel for boilers or for cement kilns, we've been running tests putting this through anaerobic digesters as a feedstock. The bugs in the reactor create a biogas, which is 60% methane. That methane can be purified through a process and then compressed and then sold out on the market for the same price as natural gas. The kicker here is that there's a renewable identification number standard that through the Renewable Fuel Standard law of Congress, U.S. Congress, that actually allows 11.7 times the payment of what ethanol, they pay for ethanol would also be on top of the cost of this that you could get paid as natural gas. So it really turned the business case around. We're still going through a very robust technical assurance study, but all indications are that this is going to be generating a lot of renewable natural gas, which in turn creates a very high return and can subsidize, or the revenues of the project will support issuance of a revenue bond issuance in the order of around $50 million. So we've got pro formas and technical assurances going on. Be happy to talk about bugs and biogas and digesters if you'd like. So I'm available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a pretty good 3 minutes worth of information right there.
I warned you.
Yeah. All right. Representative Fritz, I believe you got a question.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The organisms, the anaerobic organisms that you're using, are they self-perpetuating, or do you have to restock them? And then how do you dispose of them after they pass on?
You're recognized.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So it's a continuous project. There are bugs that are dying off and actually being created, being born, I guess, as you go through this process. And so what happens after the fuel is spent and all of the gas is used, there's a digest state. So there is a byproduct. We're talking about taking that byproduct and drying it to a level that we can haul it to Boozy Unisim. It's a cement kiln in Chattanooga that they would use that as a solid fuel to manufacture the Portland cement or the clinker. So yes, there is a byproduct, and yes, it would be dried, but we would find a beneficial reuse element for that as well.
Representative Fritz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One follow-up. If you lose that path for disposition for these organisms, is there a certified waste process for those?
Yes, so again, the Tennessee Department of Environment Conservation did designate this material as a soil amendment, so it actually could be land applied.
Chairman Halsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here. I'm not sure that I got my brain wrapped around all of that, but at the end of the day, whatever you got left over that you have to put in a landfill, whatever that is, where are you going to put it? Number one, if yours closes down, and as I understand, there's 30 some odd other counties that use your disposal site. What are they going to do, and where are they going to go, as well as you?
You're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Representative Halsey. Yes, so that's a great question, and that's one of the reasons why we've been looking at this alternative option for solid waste disposal, because it's what we would have to do is effectively create a transfer station and just haul our trash to either Camden or Lewisburg or some other nearby landfill. So this option only puts 10% of what we currently generate as a city into those landfills. So we would still have to put, if we generate 50,000 tons of garbage per year, we would still have 5,000 tons going to an alternative landfill. If the process doesn't work, then that 50,000 tons would have to be trucked to alternative landfills, and that's where we're concerned the distance of the landfills and how quickly they're going to close. And so we are really trying to be kind of an innovative leader in this regard. Does that answer your question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your question is well directed. I mean, there needs to be a solution for landfills, a larger solution. This bill doesn't alter that course at all. There does need to be, that needs to be addressed, but this doesn't have, this bill in creating, allowing a collecting municipal authority or collecting municipality to create an authority doesn't change the need to continue to address what we do with landfills. It will limit the amount that needs to go to landfill. So the amount that needs to go to landfill, as Mr. Gore said, the 5,000 tons, that happens to be glass and essentially glass and rocks. So sand and rock is what was left out of this process to go, and then metals are recycled. But there does need to be a larger solution. But that larger solution, this bill won't affect. It may enhance the ability to address that larger need statewide as we go forward.
Chairman Halsey.
I understand this summer there's supposed to be several groups get together, and I'm hoping or assuming you're part of that too, to really look at what we're going to do here in the future and how we're going to handle this, because we're running out of places to put garbage. And you can get to the place where it's so expensive for a municipality or a county to truck that even to another state, to where it almost becomes unattainable. I hope you'll be part of that discussion.
Mr. Chairman, let me, Chairman Hosey, let me address that to some respect. Chairman Sutherland and I and the Senate have talked at least twice in the last 3 weeks about this very issue, about solid waste and the state issue we have. It's more an infrastructure issue as much as it is for the whole state, and obviously it's pretty important to Murfreesboro, but there's several players that are involved and wanting to see something more comprehensive to address solid waste as a state, and those conversations will be had this summer, and there will be hopefully there'll be some legislation brought next year to address this on a wider scale. So yes, definitely those conversations will be had, and I'm sure you will be involved with those. Chairman Todd?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and appreciate you being here, both of you, to provide some expertise on this topic. I have some questions, and some of which, or all, I may ask the sponsor once we finish and go back into session, but I did want to get your input on these items. One, with this new authority, would this authority have taxing authority, where you can tax citizens?
You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Todd, it doesn't have taxing authority. It can set fees for the activity that it is within its jurisdiction. So municipal waste collection fees, then it would have the authority to set that. The county authorities now, it doesn't change anything that's existing now in statute. It just adds on to the municipal authority. And frankly, we set the fees now. So it doesn't alter that course at all.
Chairman Todd?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And knowing that there are fees that are going to be set, who is going to make up this authority? Who has the nominating authority for putting members on this authority that will be making those decisions?
Yeah,
You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The council, if it's a municipal authority, right now the statute allows the jurisdictions that are part of the authority to appoint members to the authority. If it's limited to the collecting municipality, then the city council would the elected officials in the city would appoint to the authority, and more than likely an elected official or two would sit on that authority as well.
Chairman Todd?
Thank you. So are you confident it would be the council or the mayor?
You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Generally, all of our appointments, and I'm racking my brain now, all the appointments are made by the mayor with the consent of council is generally how our structure is set. And I can't remember if that's through our charter or our ordinance, but generally our mayor has never appointed anyone that hasn't been through our council consent.
Chairman Todd?
Okay, thank you. Well, I would hope that. I wouldn't want that to lie with just one person. Right. So we want to make sure a number of elected folks are accountable there. I was curious in looking at how this is structured with the amendment, why we weren't approaching this as a private act versus going through a bill that generally would have statewide application. I mean, I know the amendment narrows it down to just your city, which is very unusual. It's one of those things that generally is considered unconstitutional if we pass a bill that have, quote, statewide application, but yet it's narrowed down to just one city. That generally is done in a private act. Can you tell me about the process and why we're going this route versus a private act?
You're recognized.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Todd, a private act would be possible depending upon the legal analysis on the obligation that the city would have if it was a private act and in its charter. What the goal was to create a separate legal entity that could issue the bonds and be fully obligated for those bonds without the full faith and credit of the city. A private act, if it creates that separation appropriately from a legal standpoint, then a private act would be an alternative. We didn't explore that, to be honest with you. It's possible. I'd go back and get our lawyers to answer that question and see if maybe that's an alternative.
Chairman Todd?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would you entertain me asking a couple of questions of our legal counsel related to that?
We are out of session. Legal?
If you don't mind, would you help me understand, I guess, two concepts here? One, the constitutionality of this amendment of narrowing it down to just this population bracket, and then two, the private act route. Does that change the responsibility of the city related to this authority? And I'm mostly concerned about their ability to pay their bonds or whatever debts they accumulate, and the city's obligation under either direction.
Legal?
Levin Middleton, Office of Legal Services. I would have to get back to you about the private act issue. I don't necessarily know that off the top of my head. In terms of population brackets, under the Tennessee Constitution, Article 11, Section 8, it essentially provides that laws are to have general application to the entire state. People are supposed to be treated equally with the laws that we pass. When you have a law that specifically applies to just a particular county or municipality, you might run afoul of that. Whether that would actually be found unconstitutional depends on, how the court analyzes it and whether there's a rational basis for limiting it to one county, municipality, that type of thing.
Chairman Todd? Is that sufficient?
Thank you for that. So as far as these authorities go and the responsibility, and just an example, last year we dealt with an authority in this state that owed a lot of money and could not make its payments. They were actually about to go under, and a city was obligated to cover those debts. We included it in the budget, took over that property in that situation from the authority, but learned a lot through that, and that's why I'm concerned about this. I know your intention is that you have that separation, but I can't believe there's a bank in the world that would loan money to an entity that was just created that has nobody standing behind it to back it. And so would Ms. Middleton be able to comment on the legal connection of obligations made by the authority to the entity that's created that authority, in this case, the city?
Legal?
I believe those obligations would be the same as they are under the current law. They were correct when they noted that this doesn't actually change any of the current powers or obligations that an authority would have in creating any of these contracts. I mean, you're going to be dealing with contracts, and they would still have to be adhered to and everything like that. So I think that's a little bit outside of, I guess, the scope of what this is specifically doing. So.
All right. Chairman Todd?
I guess, and I may be digging too deep here for what you're allowed to cover, and I apologize if I am, but you can just say that. They mentioned that at the current, if the city were to do this just on its own right now, that there's obligations and there's concerns about their liabilities, I guess, in essence, in a summary. So I'm just asking, are those really any different if they create this authority? Are there any differences to their liabilities going forward, either financial or legally, for this, if they have this authority versus the city on its own, knowing that the city is probably obligated to back the authority?
Legal?
I would have to look into that more and get back to you.
All right.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, perhaps I can address Representative Todd's question in just a little bit of background. I spent almost 2 decades as a city attorney before I became a city manager, so a little bit on the legal side and knowledge. Cities have long, and particularly utilities, have long done revenue bonds. And a revenue bond is not backed by the full faith and credit of the city. It's backed by the revenue that's generated on whatever operation is put into that revenue bond. And so if the revenue doesn't hold up on the operation, then the bond could default, and the city wouldn't technically have any legal obligation to pay that. Cities choose to sometimes because there's a reputational risk, your name's on it, but they don't have to. And that's, the authority would be the same type of, it's a separate legal entity. And what the statute allows is for the authority to issue its own financing under its own name, and not have the full faith and credit of the city backing it. These are generally done through bonds. It's not a bank. It goes to Wall Street, goes into the market. As they, the underwriters and the purchasers of the bonds underwrite portfolios, they do look for various risks, because risk equals return. And so, you know, you might pay a little bit higher revenue or interest on a revenue bond than you would on a full faith and credit taxing authority bond. But there's an appetite for those as they build their portfolios. I'll be honest with you, a $60 million Wall Street revenue bond, they'll swallow in a second. It's just not a number that shocks them at all. Our projections financially on this, which we would have in an offering statement that goes out when you sell the bonds, show that particularly when you get into the biogas side, that the revenue generation is very strong, certainly enough to support the debt service on that, which is all the bondholders really are interested in. But if it does not work out, then it would be Wall Street that would be on the hook and not the city for those bonds. That's the structure that we're looking for, and be very careful. I'm not aware of the circumstances surrounding the situation that you raised. You do have to take certain legal steps to make sure that you're covered in all those, and that's what we're trying to do, and that's why this authority, I think, is important to the city.
Chairman Todd, are you?
Thank you. I do have a couple more. It has been mentioned to me that there are some concerns about one detail in this authority, because I think this is standard with authorities like this that are formed, that it would have eminent domain. That raises a concern that we're creating an authority that could take people's personal property. So can you address that, whether that is accurate or not, and then whether or not that's a very important aspect of this process?
You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Todd, it is not, from the outset, it is not an important part of this eminent domain. It is in the statute. The authorities are right now allowed to have eminent domain. We're happy to have an amendment that would restrict it away from the collecting municipalities, so that they weren't exercising that statutory authority that already exists. That's fine. It wasn't part of our considerations. It happened to be in the statute, and we didn't amend it. But we can certainly restrict that away from the cities.
Chairman Todd, is this it?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The last question, and this is probably a little more comprehensive of the whole situation that you're dealing with in that area, that I know Chairman Terry has brought to us many times and expressed to us the concerns of the community. But I want to be sure, because as Chairman Holsey brought up a while ago, there are a lot of counties. I mean, we've got a third of the counties in this state that are taking trash to Middle Point, I understand. And I want to make sure that do we have any potential negative impacts on the current contracts that Middle Point has, or the numerous counties that are sending their trash there right now? Any negative impacts on that situation?
You're recognized.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Todd, I don't believe there'd be any negative impacts to Republic. The anticipation is that the city, which is about 50,000 tons out of the million tons that go into Middle Point, so a small percentage of what goes into Middle Point right now, would utilize the facility when it's constructed. Our hope is that the county would join us, another 50,000 tons, again, a small percentage of what goes into Middle Point. But the important aspect of that, as far as Middle Point is concerned, is we don't pay any fees to do that. You know, there are different arrangements that we have. You know, we don't pay a fee. We process our leachate, so it has a cost to us. We'd continue that under the contract. But financially, it would have no impact on, it would probably be a positive, because they would, you know, utilize that additional space with fee-paying customers as opposed to the city. From a timing standpoint, the estimates for Middle Point closing line up pretty close to what our project is. If we have about a year, or about 2 or 3 months into a design phase right now, or about 2.5 years on a construction phase, or about 3.5 years out, and then that has to ramp up. So there's about a 6 month to a year ramp up period. You're pretty close to where they're estimating Middle Point to be at capacity and start its closing process. So I don't think there's any negative impact on Middle Point with this process, but it does address the concern. And if it's successful, it's something that could certainly be replicated in a lot of different areas of the state to address the larger concerns about solid waste and handling solid waste.
I have been told through conversations we had before today that this primarily the reason for this bill or this amendment was for funding and for the ability to pull down funds from federal government. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, partially, there's a federal reimbursement for 25%, providing you meet all the criteria, which is, there's a timing deadline on that criteria, so that's why we're interested in doing it this session. But yes, that's a part of, so there's a financing, federal financing aspect to it as we construct it, and there's also a federal aspect on the credit, the RINs credit that Mr. Gore mentioned earlier on its operational standpoint that are very important to the project.
Without this authority, would those dollars still be available to the city of?
We would have to look at other financing options to get the project under construction in a timely manner. So yes, we'd pursue other options if the bill wasn't passed through, but they would have additional costs. This is an effective and efficient way, from a cost standpoint, to gather the financing. So whenever you do financing, there's hundreds of thousands of dollars that go to the middlemen and that you incur when you go out and even sell municipal bonds or anything else. But if we have to go an alternative rate, that could multiply by several, and so what we're trying to avoid is those additional costs.
I guess I'm primarily referring to government grants or federal government dollars.
We are exploring all of those now, and
But are those specifically only allowed to be given to these authorities, or can the city of Murfreesboro apply for those as they said?
oh, I see. Mr. Chairman, it can go to other entities. I mean, it's not just to an authority.
Okay.
It could go directly to.
There's
a
nothing prohibiting
municipality.
those dollars from being able to go to the city of Murfreesboro right now.
Correct.
Okay.
Right.
That's
Yeah,
right.
as long as we meet all that criteria, which is the timing part, and line up our financing. That's true. This is a vehicle that is available, or we hope is available to us for saving on the costs of going out. But yeah, the federal subsidies would still be available to the city.
Representative Shaw?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here. I just had one question, and help me with this. I think you said it'd be about 5% of waste left over from this process that you would put in a landfill. So would this be environmental friendly? Because I mean, that would probably be different chemicals from all of your different waste. So would this be environmental friendly at all times?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So the 10% would still have to go to a landfill, and this is going to basically be anything that can't be beneficially reused. So it's going to be primarily inorganic material, which would be rock, glass, sand, things that can't. Metals we're going to recycle, and all of the food waste and all of the organic waste are going to be used for fuel for this digester. This would be the least environmentally hazardous material that would come out of your trash. This is basically just going to be the inorganics. It just has no value. It's glass primarily.
Representative Shaw?
Thank you. That does lead me to ask, but if you use in other landfills, would they be willing to accept this
Yes, sir.
leftover?
Yes, sir. We would have a contract in place and a tipping fee established at another landfill. Yes, sir.
Seeing no other questions, thank you guys for coming down today or coming up today. Best wishes, and hope you have a safe trip home. We will go back into session, and I recognize Chairman Terry for any final words.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Chairman Terry, you are recognized.
Thank you, and obviously they have more knowledge on how this process works and the biogas, but I'm open to suggestions. I know the chairman had some questions about eminent domain, and obviously I don't want to put you guys on a bad vote, and obviously I share some of those concerns as well. They're willing to amend out collecting municipalities from having that authority. They already have the land that they've purchased and it's zoned for it right now, so they don't need the eminent domain, and it shouldn't in fact impact any of the contracts at Middle Point. We do know that Middle Point is supposed to close. Last year, TDEC told me 5.5 years. In the fall, they reiterated to me it was 5 years, so this year will be 4.5 years. So their whole point is they're trying to find a environmentally friendly alternative with renewable resources like we voted on last night that will coincide and decrease the cost for our constituents. You know, if we can get $16 million to help with this, and that's part of what this is about, obviously that helps our constituents. Secondly, if we only have to ship out 10% potentially elsewhere when this closes, it's going to cut down the cost for our taxpayers from $50 to $60 per month to maybe $17 per month. And that's something I think that, I mean, obviously our constituents want. So.
No doubt. Well, obviously, you've got an issue, and we've known that for quite some time. I've been here for 4 years, and I have seen something of this magnitude been brought every year. And also, just from a personal perspective, I appreciate your leadership on this and continue to always be trying to work on something, looking for a solution, and thank you for your unwavering, steady hand. Chairman Todd, you recognized?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I would echo those same comments. You've been very diligent to not only try to solve problems on a local level, but look at the regional application here, and I think what they've shared this morning and what you've shared is definitely a potential to solve some really big problems. And so I'd love to see this project go forward and see how it produces, and if the projections are accurate, and if it's a very viable alternative. I think that could be a game changer for our state. I think the concerns that have been brought that I think need a little further exploration is, one, the private act part of this. Do we need a bill that puts into law something that's just for one municipality, one locality, and vet that out, and then also the eminent domain part that we talked about. So with those considerations, Mr. Chairman, I would move that we roll this 1 week and work on those issues and see if we can get those answers so that we know for sure what we're dealing with before we move on. That way, if we've got another amendment that needs to be brought, then we can have all the information in front of us.
We have a motion to roll it 1 week. Been seconded. Any objection? Rolled 1 week.
Thank you, Chairman and Committee.
Next, we have item 2, Chairman Vaughn. HB 1054, you have a motion and a second. You are properly before the committee. You are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You all see on your calendar, I've got 4 bills here. All 4 bills stem from, believe it or not, my career. I know most of you probably think I'm just a plus-size model, but I'm much deeper than that. In the real estate world, by the way, that was let that one marinate a little bit.
Chairman, we could go lots of directions with that, with some of the questions you were asking last night, so let's not digress.
Understood. One of the things that's really gotten under my skin here lately is the cost that's going unnoticed is the cost of regulatory inflation. Things are happening as people well-intentioned people come forward trying to do things in the name of great causes, but it results in extended time periods, extended approval cycles, extended investments, and I'm beginning to ask myself, are we at a plus gain for our actions in doing this? Because there's an expression in real estate, it's time costs money, and then also time kills projects. I'm here today to talk with you about my experience with the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation through this is probably about the last 10 years, as we have seen more increased regulatory activity. We have seen more subjective enforcement. We've seen more it depends on what regulator you get, how you're handled with regards to projects. Now there's also been the introduction of what is your intent, not necessarily your activity with regards to the regulatory environment. I've also learned that whenever they refer to a resource, that's their way of telling you if they're going to tell you what to do with your property. That's the way this works. And let me provide a background for this. I'm an outdoorsman. I'm a conservationist. I'm a farmer. This is something, protecting our environment and protecting ecosystems is something that I feel very strongly about. Whether it be the Ghost River area of the Wolf River, which is some of the coolest territory you've ever seen, or even the Grinnell Pond down on the Hatchie River. There are places, or maybe some of the sloughs on my farm. There are resources that need to be protected, but I'll tell you what doesn't need to be protected and what doesn't need to add additional cost to projects, and that is ruts where a tractor went through a farm to pull somebody out. How about a mud hole that was formed from teenagers mudding via trespassing and later grows back and grows some willows in it and becomes a wetland? Tell you something, here's one that we had to do on a project, and that is where the property was pasture prior to its development. The farmer had fed round bales, and the round bales were on a slope, but because the cows tromped up the mud during the wintertime, it provided a nice little terracing system that withheld moisture because it had a grade on it, and it became, these feed areas were having to be mitigated in order for eventually for a warehouse to be constructed. My district is one that is different than a lot of other people's districts. We're in the path of growth. Also in West Tennessee, soils types are different than those here in Middle and different in Eastern Tennessee. We have clay layers. Well, number one, I grew up thinking, I didn't know that dirt was a pollutant. That's one issue. That's one of the things that I think somewhere along the way we got out of whack. But when it rains, our creeks and streams, the scientific word for muddy becomes turbid. The turbidity level goes up. And the difference between the turbidity level in our streams and creeks is different than some of the pristine stuff that I see on the plateau or further east of the plateau. I guess this is a long way of telling you is that I've brought these bills forward because I want us to have a conversation about what we're doing from a regulatory environment and are we really helping anybody? And I've got an example on one of these bills that I want to show to you of how things get out of whack. But first off, I want to say I appreciate the leadership at TDEC for coming and talking with me about this issue. They have been helpful to me in these items. And so just from an example or some of the things I want to do, the first bill, 1054, that has to do, Mr. Chairman, with the definition of wetlands not occurring unless it's consistent with the federal regulations. I've had situations where the Corps of Engineers has come out to sites and said, we're not going to take jurisdiction of these wetlands. Yet I have representatives from TDEC that come out and say, those are wetlands and you will protect them and you will mitigate for them. That's a problem because we're in this because of decisions made long ago, and it is a federal issue. And so, but the great thing about it is Assistant Commissioner has come to me and said, you know what, maybe we have got our eye off the mark a little bit, and so why don't we do this? Because my thoughts are is if the feds don't think it's a resource, which is your property that they have control of, then I don't think the state should either. But I'm willing to take that one off notice in the event, or to give us some time to get some stakeholder groups together to discuss this, a new weighting system on the value of what types of wetlands are, because again, my thoughts are is the Ghost River section of Wolf River is a different resource than a feed lot that's been trumped up by cows. And so, if you don't mind, I'd like to dispose of 1054 by taking it off notice, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Todd has a question before we take it off notice, though.
I appreciate you bringing this because I've dealt with some of these in my professional career as well. One just weeks ago, literally, on a project that a consultant had come out early and said, this little spot that's smaller than half of this counter here is a wetland. It's isolated, it's not connected to anything, has no nexus, as you know. that has been ruled is important. Yet they had to spend money to mitigate this little small area that was a former farm, probably, like you mentioned, a cattle walla or something like that. And so there are certainly some excesses here that I feel like we can rein in to some degree without damaging the important resources that are valuable, as you've stated. And I agree with that value and protection. I wouldn't mind seeing this move forward a little bit, but if you feel like from the conversations you've had that you've got the assurances that those conversations will be had in the future and decisions made, policies made that can make those effective changes in the field and how this is dealt with, then I'm certainly willing to do that. But if you have any doubt, I would like to see this move forward. If you have any doubt, sir, I'll leave that up to you.
Would you like to respond, Chairman Vaughn?
Yes, sir. Chairman Todd, this is a good faith effort on my part to deal with TDEC. I believe the Assistant Commissioner is sincere on his desire to work something out on this. But I can tell you, I'm taking it off notice, but it will be the first piece of legislation that I put on notice next January if we can't reach a conclusion on this. And so this is one of those to where we're not going to form a study group and talk about it for 2 or 3 years. We're either going to reach a point of agreement, or I'm going to bring it to my colleagues to weigh the matter out and decide which way we want the state to progress in this matter.
Chairman Vaughn, did you say that you had an inspector come out and ask you what the intentions were of what you were going to do in the future with a piece
yes,
of
sir.
property?
I'll read to you from an email here in a moment.
Okay. I'm interested in that. Chairman Hosey?
Before you leave this bill, I'm sorry I'm ignorant. If you got a hog waller or a cattle waller and somebody comes out and says from TDEC and says this is a protected area, and you say mitigate, what action does that word mean?
Chairman Vaughn?
Chairman Halsey, well, the great news is that if it's still an active farm, you can clean it up. But if your intent is that you're going to be developing the property for some other use, that's when the mitigation comes in, and you either have to provide that same resource somewhere else, or you have to pay someone who has a mitigation bank that has these credits that you pay them money for. So you, as a user of the property, wind up having to get your wetlands delineated. That means they put little flags where they are. You have to get a survey to show where they are. Then you have to count up how much is there. And if it's more than a quarter acre, you don't fall under a general permit, you fall under an individual permit. And that's when you have to go through a process where you've got to determine whether or not there's natural resources, bad habitat, all kinds of things. And then they will determine what mitigation ratio, let's say you've got all told on your property, and I'll talk about this in a minute, more than a quarter acre, well, then they'll decide how the degree of what that resource is, and they'll either make you buy twice as many of those as a mitigation credit. So basically, what you're doing is you're paying somebody money for what was a hog waller that's on the property that you bought. And that is supposed to make our environment better. And what happens is that process, here's the really bad thing about it, is by the time you get the professionals to fill the application out for all of those things, you're probably another season. And we've seen with volatile interest rates, we've seen people get run over by trucks. You know, there's things that happen in the course of life that projects don't always flow the way that you want them to. And so we've seen projects killed because of the fact that something has happened while we're still waiting on approval from the regulatory authorities. I've got an ARAP individual permit that I'm going to discuss here in a minute that's out that we're in our 2nd year of waiting on that permit. And so that's the downside, or the penalty that's the real penalty you pay with this, is the fact that the time kills you, as well as whatever happens during that period of time that you're waiting to be able to proceed with whatever it is you're doing.
Chairman Hosey, are you satisfied? Okay. Chairman Todd had a follow-up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll help further explain that. So these wetland mitigation banks are generally done by private sector, not always, but sometimes, and they will go into a piece of property that may be a farm that used to be a wetland 100 years ago, but somebody ditched it and drained it and converted it to farmland. And they'll buy that piece of property and they basically return it to be a wetland. And it's all through an approval process, and they get credit for that. Let's say it's a 100-acre field, and they have 100 acres of wetlands, and they can sell those credits by creating that wetland. They can sell to someone that is developing property and damaging or destroying a wetland on this new piece of property. So you're offsetting the damage you've done to this resource. And generally, the intent was that if you've got a valuable resource, a wetland that is performing the functions of a wetland, of replenishing groundwater, cleaning up surface water, and all the things wetlands do, then you want to try to mimic that in that region if you can, to offset that removal of that resource. So it's done on a ratio, as he said, where you might have an acre here, you might have to mitigate that by buying 3 acres of this new wetland area. So it incentivizes people to go create these new wetlands and in order to allow development in other places in that same region. So it's a good process, but it's gotten to the point where things that are not valuable resources, that are not what I would consider true wetlands, are technically wetlands, and that's kind of where the issue around this revolves. Thank you, sir.
Chairman Vaughn, is it your desire to take this bill off notice with the understanding that TDEC is going to do everything in their power to make sure that these needs and these wants and these desires are mediated?
Yes, sir. That's my show of goodwill and good faith and understanding that we're going to get a stakeholders group together to where we discuss the frustrations and values of the system as it currently exists and see if we can't do something that works better for everyone.
Okay. Yeah. Without objection, we'll take this bill off notice then. We will move to item number 3, HB 1055. Chairman Vaughn, we have a motion and second. You are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, given the fact that particularly in eastern Shelby County, we were an agrarian community for years and years and years, and development has caught up with us. And so one of the issues that we have seen is that farming activities, whether or not they are beneficial to development, I've seen a regulatory swing to where well, first off, let's say this. Farming and forestry are 2 items that are not covered under the Clean Water Act and in our statutes are exempted from coverage from the section of code dealing with TDEC and the environment. That was due to back when the Federal Clean Water Act was approved, those 2 items were exempted. What we've got now, though, is there are opportunities for people who own agricultural land to use agricultural practices to enhance their property that would benefit its marketability for a use after it's come out of agriculture. In other words, if I'm a farmer and I want to convert woodlands to pasture ground, I can go out there, harvest the timber, dig the stumps, go about my business, reseed over the top, and nobody should care. Yet if I am doing that and then later on in the process, I file for a construction general permit, which is what TDEC requires for construction sites where more than an acre of soil is disturbed, then they come in and they're not happy with you. Let's just leave it at that. Let me give you a for instance. Prior to, let's say my client, purchased, and the reason behind this is because frankly I don't want my clients or, it's interesting, I've gotten several emails of support from environmental consultants that won't give me their name because they're scared of retribution.
Really?
So the standing timber was sold to a logger from Bolivar, as a matter of fact. He's a master logger. He's recognized by the Department of Agriculture as a master logger. The trees were planted by blank nursery company for the purpose of harvest. So this piece of property was a operating nursery that, because development had come up to its borders, it was no longer profitable for them to raise trees and bushes for selling. The logger began harvesting the timber on the site in February and continued through March. All work done was typical to timber operations in the area. This involved the sawing of trees. This wasn't even pushing them over where the stumps could be dug easily. This was with a saw cutter machine. And use of timber jacks to drag material to a loading area from which they were trucked off to area sawmills. They had pulled off the project prior to returning it before cleaning up the roads and clearing the tops and the slash material that was taken down in order to get access to the timber. So we had a place where a man went in and harvested trees that were planted for the purpose of harvest. Then, meanwhile, we filed the CGP application for the development of the site and received the email from you on a certain such date advising us to halt activities at the site. In follow-up conversations, you relayed to our consultants that you believe the activity should be covered by a construction general permit. As a result, we have not utilized any machine on your site. Here was TDEC's response. Please understand that while we acknowledge that the property was originally a nursery and the trees were initially planted to harvest, the harvesting of the trees for development purposes changes the intent of the property. And therefore, the harvesting activity is not exempt under the statutes. So once we followed the rules, the person sold the standing timber to somebody, sold the land to somebody else. Well, because that was before the development of the site, then what I wanted to do was clarify that excavation, and I've also, there's been some confusion about farm ponds, people digging farm ponds. I watched the GovOps meeting in 2019 where somebody from TDEC said farm ponds are exempt from construction general permits, but if you go to TDEC's website, there is a bulletin where they have this great cooperative program with the Farm Service Agency saying that, yes, indeed, you need a CGP permit for your farm pond. That's the kind of stuff I want to get straight, because this nexus of agriculture meeting development, are we going to say that because a farmer has seen his land values increase, that another use is more valuable, that he loses his rights as a farmer? And that's something that I strongly, don't regulate me what I'm thinking I might do next year. Regulate me for what I'm doing. Because what that does is that suddenly allows a regulator to determine whether or not they agree with your intent, or do they believe what you're doing. And whenever there's a lot of subjectivity in this area, this is something that I think needs to be addressed. Commissioner Young gave me a lesson, and he's a big-time lawyer, and he saved me from myself on this one. He said that I was going to diminish that segregation that is already allowed for farmers and forestry operations in the early stages of our existing statutes. I'm hopeful that our conversations here will move forward to the point to where the people in the field understand that operate for TDEC, because you know what happens is when you get one of these emails, you stop work. And when you stop work, your contractor leaves you. And then all of a sudden there's whispers that you're a rogue developer not following the law. And then your contractors don't know whether they want to work for you. You got to try to schedule them back on the site. And it's all based upon what somebody thinks. It's not what's written on the paper. And so, but Commissioner Young told me that there's more authority in what's already in statute than that I would diminish the authority by doing this. And like I said, I trust his judgment in this matter and will defer to that. And so, but my thoughts are is that I want this body, and that's what the next bill does, is to decide whether we want our regulators regulating what's actually happening or why people are doing it. Because the why people are doing it, I find to be scary. And so with this one, Mr. Chairman, I'm gonna ask that it be taken off notice as well.
Would you take a question from Chairman Reedy?
Yes, please.
Chairman Reedy?
Chairman Vaughn, I appreciate you bringing all of this up. I want to share with you something that has taken place, not too in the far past, but it was the waters of the United States and the previous bill. Pull up a fence post on my property, it fills that hole up with water, and then it needs to be regulated by EPA or somebody else. But something more important than that, I left session and I stopped at a fast food restaurant in Clarksville, and I have a constituent who works for the Department of Transportation. Members, you're going to be surprised at this. And along the interstate, I forget the mile marker, he says, as you are leaving Nashville going to Clarksville, look for this mile marker, and when you see there, you'll see water along the interstate, and it's growing cattails. And it wasn't always like that. So we went to TDEC and said, we need to clean this up before it floods the interstate. And then they said, well, that's fine. If TDOT will give us $9,500 in mitigation fees, you guys can clean it up. One state department giving another state department money, it just blows my mind, and I appreciate you bringing this to us. I mean, it's the Kevin Vaughn hour, but you're hitting a nail on the head, and we need to start paying attention what's being done. I've got a farm, and I've got some issues as well, soil erosion, getting NRCS out there. They're the professionals, in my opinion, in the room, because the NRC office is in every state, in every county, so we've got access to these folks. And with that, they'll bring state funding to match mine when I'm starting to lose soil and the water quality. And of course, I've heard from TDEC before, you can't put any machinery in the creek because you're going to muddy the water. And we just had the big storm. It looked like you had 100 bulldozers going every which way, as muddy as that water was. And I reach out to TWRA and saying, okay, if I could fix this now and stop this turbidity, protect the aquatic, the wildlife in the water and along the shores, does it make more sense for me to take care of this now as a farmer who respects the land, because I plan on leaving it to the next generation, my kids, or do I let all the flooding and all of this mess flow down the creeks, jamming it up with debris and everything else? But I appreciate this conversation. Keep me posted what you're doing, because I want to be part of this conversation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
I want to ask you one question, though. I guess it's probably from the question I asked earlier. So this farmer planted trees with the intent of harvesting them when they were mature.
Correct.
He harvests the trees, and then TDEC comes back and reprimands him?
Well, what happened was, sir, Mr. Chairman, he sold the timber to one person and sold the land to the other. And the fact that the trees were harvested when the inspectors for TDEC went out, even though they were all sawed off at the stump, they said, oh no, the reason that this is a problem is because you have also filed for a development CGP, or construction general permit. So we know that the next step, after you get it cleaned up, is going to be development. And our client was filing the proper paperwork, because once they started in there digging the stumps and grading and doing that kind of stuff, that was development activity. But the harvesting of these trees had nothing in and of itself. They were finishing out the intent of the land. And so as we and part of this is for understanding of my clients and where we operate, is a lot of these places are 1,000-acre farms. Well, you know what? While they're but the owners of them are visionary, that say, if I do this, my land will be more valuable for development that's going to come one day, maybe not in my generation, but the next. And so does their intention of creating value for the purpose of development now put them under TDEC, or do it puts them under the farming exclusion? That's the question that we've got to ask ourselves, because let me tell you what, out on Highway 64 in Bolivar, if I go to digging up trees and stuff, nobody's going to care, because they're going to know it's part of, I don't have any development value to my land. But why should I be regulated any differently because of that than somebody who owns property on I-40 between Jackson and Memphis? It doesn't make sense. It's not fair. And I want to try to get to where there's clear understanding, not just within the development community, but also in the regulatory community. Because I will say this, and this is what I've learned, is that unreasonable regulation lends itself to noncompliance. That's what you get from it. You incentivize people not to follow the rules. And so that's what I'd like to do, is where everybody knows the rules are fair, they're fairly applied, and go forth and do good.
Chairman Todd?
I just want to make sure I didn't mislead anybody earlier on the mitigation conversation when we're talking about wetlands and talking about TDEC and their permitting. The mitigation banks or other forms of mitigation that are required, TDEC doesn't take any money from that. They don't get paid for that. The entity would have to write a check to that owner of the mitigation bank or then go and create their own somewhere at their own expense, but they're not writing a check to TDEC. I just wanted that on the record just for accuracy. Thank you.
All right. Well, yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, that's true. My issue here, I do not find that the actions of TDEC or even their field folks are self-serving in this. I think what happens is that some people see the world differently than other people do, and when you wind up with a subjective area to where you get to gauge thoughts and intents, then that's what scares me so much about this bill. Actions are actions. Judge me on my actions, not why I did it.
I understand that you want to take this bill off notice, but
Yes, sir.
I have every confidence that TDEC will do what they say they're going to do. Commissioner Young is, in my opinion, he seems to be a man of integrity, and my experience has been pleasant. So I expect next year you not have to worry about this. So, Representative Travis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I have another meeting that I'm about 10 minutes late for, and I hate to miss this next one, but I think I'm going to be a yes vote on the next one, whatever it is.
All right, we're going to take this bill off notice then without objection. It's off notice. Chairman Vaughn, you're recognized on HB 1056. If we can get a motion in a second. We have those. You're recognized.
Thank you, sir. This deals with the intent aspect of this effort, and this language says that if I file for a permit, judge me on the information in the permit. Don't quit asking me about what I plan to do in the future. Handle this permit for what it says, not for what the actions may be in the future.
Now, I believe we have an amendment.
Yes, sir. The amendment is, and this was drafted again by my expert legal opinion at the Tennessee Department of Environment Conservation. This Amendment 5012.
That's what we have. We have a motion on the amendment. We have a second on the amendment. All in favor of putting the amendment on the bill, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? On the bill. Now we're back on the bill. Chairman Vaughn, you're recognized once again.
Thank you, sir. The reason it was amended was because we limited it to construction general permits. TDEC brought to me the fact that some of their permits that they issue have to do with future capacity of water systems and waste streams and that type stuff. And so rather than do that, what I want to do was start here, and if we need to do it moving forward with aquatic resource alteration permits, we'll do that. But for right now, this is going to be easing into a situation. So this frankly just deals with construction general permits. And because what I get tired of answering the question is, what are you going to do with this? If I've got a 250 acre site and I'm only permitting 20 acres of it, and they say, well, what are you doing with the rest of it? Well, I can tell you what I might plan on doing, but I don't know. Let me tell you what, I planned on being retired by now because all the real estate deals were going to be great, and I'm not. So I don't know what's going to happen in the future. I can know what I'm planning for, but I don't know so this says, only judge me for what's in the application.
I understand. Anybody have any questions for the sponsor? Seeing none, I think we've exhausted all the other questions on the first two bills. Seeing none, we will vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Ayes have it. On to full committee. See you next week on HB 1056.
Thank you, sir, and I will try not to be so verbose, but I want y'all to understand, and I want it on the record, that this was not brought to me by the home builders. It was not brought to me by the developers. It wasn't brought to me by the road builders. It wasn't brought to me by the Chamber of Commerce. This is me seeing something that I thought that was broken, that I thought needed to be fixed, and I tried to use whatever I could do to try to make an impact, to get the needle swung in the direction that it needs to go in.
All right, next we have item number 5, HB 1057. We have a motion, we have a second. You're properly recognized, Chairman Vaughn.
All right, this is the
And
one
we
I'm
have an
gonna give-
amendment as well?
Yes, sir, it's Amendment 5016.
5016, does the amendment make the bill?
Yes, sir.
All right, let's put the bill, or the amendment on the bill. We have a motion and a second on the bill. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Amendment is on the bill. We are back on the bill. You're recognized.
Let me tell you the story of two sites within a half a mile of each other. Neither one of them, one was the ground that I told you about, where we harvested the trees from. We had to go in and provide a wetland delineation, and it was a 1/4 acre. The site a half a mile away was a former soybean field that the beans had been cut the fall before construction started in the spring. But we had a roadside ditch that, because of some sediment that had come in at low flow, it had blocked the pipe. And so cattails were growing in the roadside ditch, but there were also, there was a sewer pipe along the backside that, when it had been backfilled, it hadn't been made completely level, so water had built up there, and then there were a couple of terraces. So it was determined to have 0.3 acres of isolated wetlands in about 6 or 7 different areas on this 40-acre parcel. So the 0.3 acres of wetlands had to have an individual permit, but the 0.25 was able to have a general permit, so we did not have to mitigate. So I got a 1/4 acre for free, but since I broke the 0.25 category over here, I had to mitigate against all 0.3 acres. I didn't have to mitigate for the delta between the two, the 0.05. It was for the whole 0.3. What this bill seeks to do is say, hey, oh, and by the way, the difference in that, by the time we got through with the consultants and the time and everything else, it added about $100,000 in cost to that subdivision development. And then when you look at it from that standpoint, that gets transferred to the purchaser. But in the way the real estate and residential housing market works, houses are valued at 10 times or 5 times the lot. So you take that $100,000, that added $500,000 to consumers, the cost of finding those areas on this property. And for what? What ecosystem did we save? What did we do? We just took our clients' money and plugged it in, paid some consultants. That's, the consultants got to eat too. But now we've added at the backside of it $500,000 in increased cost to consumers and got no value. What this does, it says, at least give me the 1/4 acre credit on an ARAP wetland alteration permit that I would get if I was below the 0.3. I mean, below the 0.25.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do we have any questions to the sponsor? Very good presentation.
Thank you, sir. Sorry. Firsthand, I have no talking points.
Yeah, seems to be passion behind it. Chairman Todd, you're recognized again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I, as I mentioned a while ago, I've seen these same things as well, and never quite thought about it this way, that you should get credit for what the general permit already offers for free, if you will. But certainly an interesting concept, and I think very equitable. I think this is makes sense. It's kind of common sense. If you ask anybody on the street about this, if they could get their hands around it, I think they would agree. So I appreciate you bringing this, sir. Thank you.
No other questions, and we'll be voting on sending House Bill, make sure I'm right, 1057 to full. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Ayes have it, on to full.
Thank you, sir. I have 2 things to say.
Yes, sir.
I appreciate Commissioner Young and his willingness to work through this and to assist me. And number 2, I appreciate your indulgence in allowing me to vet things today. I appreciate it very much.
We appreciate you being at the tip of the spear fighting for some of these rights.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chairman. Just making sure we have a quorum there, Chairman Reedy.
I appreciate that.
We have HB 394 carried by Chairman Reedy. We have a motion and we have a second. We also have an amendment for this bill. Is that correct?
I'm not familiar with an amendment. If we've got an amendment, we'll have to roll this thing.
We do have. Four, five, five, four. By Representative Wright.
Mr. Chairman, I guess we need to roll this till next week because I don't have that amendment. All right, I'm ready now. I know what took place in the Senate.
So there is an amendment on the bill.
There is.
Okay, we have an amendment. We have an amendment on the, I'm sorry, we have a motion on the amendment. We have a second on the amendment. All in favor of putting House Amendment 4554 on HB 394, say aye. Any opposed? On the bill. Now the bill as amended, Chairman Reedy, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. I appreciate your indulgence on this one. I want to say thank you to Chairman Wright for letting me present this. And of course, Chairman Todd was familiar back when Governor Lee became governor. We had a meeting in the governor's conference room with USDA. Senator Nicely was a number of members from the House and the Senate discussing slaughterhouses and looking for primacy in the state of Tennessee. Then it was shortly after that, of course, with Commissioner Hatcher and both the governor and Commissioner Hatcher agrees, and certainly to Chairman Todd next week, if this bill moves out, if he'll allow the commissioner to speak on this bill as well. He was unavailable this week. And after we had that meeting in the governor's office, then we ended up going to Kentucky, meeting with House members and senators there, as well as their Commissioner of Agriculture, still talking about the primacy and the shortfall of inspected custom slaughterhouses. Then and there was different pieces of the puzzle through the years that we were putting into place, because it was interesting to find out we had very few USDA inspected slaughterhouses in Tennessee, and actually Kentucky was further ahead. Now this is a piece of the puzzle, and there's a fiscal note on it, and let me read right from the fiscal note what we're doing. It creates the Tennessee Meat and Meat Producers Inspection Act, removes all reference to meat, livestock, and deer from the Tennessee Meat and Poultry Inspection Act, requires the Commissioner of Department of Agriculture to develop and administer an intrastate meat inspection program with requirements at least equal to those imposed by the Federal Meat Inspection Act, and cooperate with the United States Department of Agriculture to do so. And if you go to on the same fiscal note, and I'll read for the record, the USDA currently inspects all meat facilities in the state except custom slaughterhouses. Federal law authorizes states to establish state meat and poultry inspection programs, which is not currently established under the Tennessee Meat and Poultry Inspection Act. This legislation requires a meat inspection program, but does not require such inspections for poultry. This legislation will have no direct impact upon the current duties of the USDA regarding food inspections under the doctrine of preemption. Therefore, this legislation is estimated to have no significant impact upon duties or funds made and spent by the federal government. A big part of this bill, what we're doing is asking, and if you look at the fiscal note, $1.2 million out of the general fund to hire and put to work our own meat inspectors in these custom slaughterhouses. And I was actually given talking points. It's 2 pages. I won't go into it, but we'll certainly read it for the record if necessary. If not, it will be read in the full committee. If there's any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Do we have any questions for Chairman Reedy? I feel like everybody's pretty much on board with you, Chairman. No, there will be no questions. We will move this on to full committee if we can get the affirmative votes. All in favor of sending House Bill 394 to full committee, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. On to full. Next week, we will see you in full. Thank you, Chairman Reedy. That wraps up everything we had on our calendar today. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for hanging in there and indulging us. We will entertain a motion to adjourn and go have some lunch. We are adjourned.